Welcome to this week's Wellness Wednesday. And I'm excited for a new series we're going to be doing as part of Wellness Wednesday, where I'm going to be talking with the nutrition team here at the Optimum Health Clinic and working to break down different facets and elements of how we work using a functional medicine approach to working with fatigue-related conditions. For this first episode, I'm talking with Kirsty Cullen, who is Director of Nutrition here at the Optimum Health Clinic. And we're talking about, is eating well enough? People often come to Optimum Health Clinic and say, I eat a really good diet. Is that not enough to support recovery from a fatigue-related condition? So here's Kirsty Cullen, and here is eating well enough? So welcome, Kirsty. Thank you for joining me for this video. And in this video, we're going to be talking about, is eating well enough? And this is obviously a big question that people ask us when they come to Optimum Health Clinic. So maybe just to open this up a bit, is eating do you feel that eating a conventional healthy diet is enough for recovery from chronic illness such as chronic fatigue, ME, fibromyalgia, that group of conditions?
Yeah, and contentious as it sounds, and as a registered nutritional therapist, you'd expect me to say, of course, yes, it's the answer. I'm going to say in most cases, no, it's not. And I mean that in the conventional sense of this classic idea of healthy eating. So this classic idea of getting my 5 a day, is that going to be enough for recovery from ME/CFS? No, would be probably the short answer. So yes, kind of in an initial consultation, when we look at a food diary, we're going to assess that baseline diet and look at where it can be healthier, better balanced, more nutrient dense, less refined. But that kind of just scratches the surface of nutrition work. And in some senses, this idea of kind of my 5 a day healthy eating really oversimplifies what the role of nutrition is. So when we're considering what needs to go onto that plate in terms of ME/CFS recovery and that journey, we're going to be thinking in much more depth than kind of getting your 5, fruit and veg a day. The protocol and the approach at OHC is a combination of strategies. So we're looking at diet, but we're also looking at supplements, we're looking at lifestyle strategies. And then as the process gets underway, often what we recommended to put on the plate at the start of the journey evolves and changes because each functional system in the body responds very positively to different foods and different nutrients. So we need to kind of reflect that. But also it's really important to recognize that every single person is individual and distinct. So they'll have different sort of biochemical requirements, they'll have different genetic requirements. Depending on their symptoms, they'll have different sort of food requirements around those. And so all of those need to be reflected and acknowledged sort of in terms of our recommendations and what we're recommending should go on that plate. That being said, that foundation diet, that sense of kind of the healthy eating is a really, really important foundation, and it can make a huge impact initially. And it's that foundation that we're going to then build on in a very specific way.
Because often people will come and see us and they'll have done either by themselves, they'll have tried to make changes. They'll either cut out foods or they'll have added in certain foods. They might have worked with one or sometimes a dozen previous practitioners. And often people can be quite frustrated because they feel like, well, I've been doing nutrition. Why hasn't it made any sort of difference?
Yeah, because as you say, people have often been ill for a long time. And I pick this up sometimes in our 15-minute chats. There can be a real sense of frustration within that, and that I've tried being gluten-free, that made no difference. I have a healthy diet and I'm still ill. So can you explain to me why that is? And I completely understand it. If people have made a significant independent effort to make change and there's been little reward for it, they can become quite skeptical about how what's on the plate is going to make any impact at all. I also think, and I know from speaking to lots and lots of clients, that, you know, we are blessed or cursed with an internet full of information about nutrition. It's an absolute rabbit warren of information, and very confusing, and blindsides a lot of people. So actually having someone there to walk through that process, to assess your individual needs and sort of what the recovery journey and the dietary plan might look like through that is really, really important. And I was thinking about an analogy this morning, and this will probably make no sense now I say it out loud, but I think about recovery as kind of an orchestra. And so what is on the plate in terms of your daily meal is just a section of that orchestra. The rest of the orchestra can't work without it, but without that section, we can't make music, we can't sort of, you know, work harmoniously. So it is very fundamental, but it is just one part of the orchestra. And so we've got other elements that we absolutely need to combine together if we're going to get a thorough and kind of multifaceted approach to recovery.
Because I think often people's misconception around nutrition is it is just working with food. And as you mentioned, there's a lot more pieces of that jigsaw or parts of that orchestra, in a sense, that for some people, just changing diet, for example, to help manage blood sugar can be something that makes a noticeable, significant difference. For other people, if there's, for example, something like SIBO or some kind of gut bacteria issue going on, until you actually deal with that, which you can't just often do through food, you're not really impacting the core issue. So maybe say a bit about what are the sorts of benefits then that people can expect to see from making dietary changes.
And I think managing this expectation is key, actually. I think it really is, because the type of change that you might expect to see is not always what you're going to get. And I think it's firstly really important to recognize that food, and specifically individual nutrients, have the capacity to make a change at a cellular level, as well as kind of impacting on specific symptoms like bloating or headaches. We're thinking at a cellular level. Clients will often come to us with kind of 3 or 5 top symptoms that they're looking to improve. And of course, that's their and our often kind of measure of improvement and progress as we go along the journey. But I think it's really important to recognize that CFS is embedded at a cellular level. So we want to be looking to achieve fundamental changes at that level to kind of find long-term health improvements. So, you know, excluding a certain food from a diet or adding a certain food in for a short period of time is not always going to bring about an obvious result. There might not be an immediate and specific symptom change, but that's not to say that that change isn't beneficial. So if we take sort of a specific dietary recommendation as a working example, so if, for example, we took the premise of let's remove gluten containing foods from your diet, for one person that might result really immediately in a reduction in bloating, a reduction in IBS symptoms. Great. So that would be considered a positive result. For somebody else, they just might not get that same response, but it doesn't make that change any less beneficial. Because for them, we might be looking at it in a very different way. Our sort of motivation for putting that recommendation in place might be more about supporting an improvement in the health of their intestinal wall. It might be about supporting a decrease in their overall systemic sort of inflammatory burden. It might be about reducing or supporting a reduction in immune activation. So the aims and outcomes in that situation wouldn't be immediately obvious to the client, but actually nonetheless really, really essential to their overall improvement and sort of recovery journey. So understanding why you're making a dietary change as a client is really important to kind of your approach to it and your compliance around it. I think it's also really important to understand specifically with ME/CFS is that it's a complex condition, and complex health issues often require a sustained and patient approach. So, you know, the changes may not happen overnight. And so if we kind of go back to the orchestra analogy, you know, you've got to build that orchestra section by section, and it's going to take patience and practice and consistency to kind of achieve, you know, the desired outcomes.
And I think that's one of the reasons as well why working with an experienced practitioner is so important, because if you're just making generic changes that sort of make sense on paper but don't necessarily have the depth of experience, then you can be going through quite a lot of kind of frustration without necessarily going, you can go down a whole path, but it's not necessarily the path that's going to progress you. And so having someone that really is able to put together that bigger picture and understand that we need to deal with this piece because that will then allow us to then deal with this piece over here. And these two pieces together are the things that mean that then this piece is the thing which probably is going to be the most important thing. And that's where that depth of clinical experience is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. It can take some nerve sometimes to hold a path and sort of stick to that strategy when the results aren't immediately obvious. I can completely understand that. So often, as you say, you need that experience to say, just, hang on, let's just keep moving through this process to look at the benefits in sort of the midterm rather than the short term.
Fantastic, Kirsty. Thank you. And I should say we're doing this as part of a 3-part introductory series. So in the next video, which will probably come out in a week's time, we'll get into more about the actual OHC Optimal Health Clinic approach to working nutrition. But for now, thank you very much. So I hope you found that helpful. If you want to find out more about nutrition at the Optimum Health Clinic, you can go to theoptimumhealthclinic.com. You can request a free information pack. You can also book a free 15-minute chat to speak to either Kirsty or one of the nutrition team about how we might be able to specifically help support you. Tomorrow, coming up on Everyday Alex, it's Thoughtful Thursday. And for this week's Thoughtful Thursday, I'm going to be talking about what stops people healing. What are some of the key things that can get in the way of and block the healing process? So I look forward to talking with you tomorrow.